It's raining tacos from out of the sky. Tacos, no need to ask why. Just open your mouth.
Ring, 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 banana phone.
Well, that's for us for chemistry or science in general, that's easy, okay? We have the entire universe, to me, okay? I mean, if we go biblically to Psalm 19:1, you know, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord. I know I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but that, I mean, first and foremost, we have that, okay? And so for us, it's easy. It's like, look, I can just look at the stars at night and say, man, that is so big and that is so awesome that there has to be a creator. That could not just have happened. Okay, I don't have enough faith to believe that just came into, you know, without some outside creator.
I don't think that there is unequivocal evidence for a creator. I think there are hints at a creator for those who know the creator, and I mean the heavens declare the glories of the Lord, but I don't think it's fair to say that there's evidence that tells us who God is. And I also don't think that God would put evidence that, like, hands down convinces us that he is there in the world. Like I said, there's hints, there's certainly like components of creation that you see and you're like, wow, that has to have been a creator God. But I think there's always going to be the opportunity to say, that could have happened by chance. At least for those who don't know God or want to know God or what have you. Like, I think there's always going to be the option to say, I don't have to believe in God, because if there wasn't that option, then essentially God has already revealed himself in evidence, and he's more interested in our hearts and in our faith than us following evidence blindly.
There is, my field is microbiology, molecular biology. So I work with small things, bacteria, DNA, proteins, these small molecules that make up all of the cells and the complex organisms that humans are and that we have in the natural world. And so I think just the idea that these things are as complex as they are, all the molecules that are involved in a strand of DNA, or all the things that have to work in this very organized and complex mechanism that is the cell, suggests that it's very difficult for this to happen by chance. And so in some ways, it almost makes more sense that there would be a creator that makes this than this just being a probabilistic thing that happens.
If you look at the natural world, all right, so right now we're in the midst of spring, okay? And as far as I can remember, and as far as, recorded human history, spring has always followed winter. Summer will follow spring, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a certain particular order to all of this. We go around the sun, takes about 365 days. But it always has happened, right? We have the rainbow, which occurs after a shower, right? Okay, so I mean it's there are all these things that we just have always happened. Gravity always still works, right? I mean, now might come a time when it might not, but for most of us and most time, it has always worked. So
our faith and the Word of God is really what tells us that there's a creator. So with evidence, science, anything in neuroscience, it's not necessarily going to point towards or prove that there is or isn't one. Within the current paradigm that we're under, that's not really how people or neuroscience is operating. From my own personal perspective, though, things that I look at and consider would be the complexity of life in general. We think we know a lot about how the brain works, but when we actually get down to it, we still have very little idea how most of it works. There's some interesting anecdotes with people that work in medical devices where we know how the heart works, so things like pacemakers and defibrillators, we are working on making them the best they can possibly be because we understand how that system works. But with things like spinal cord stimulators or deep brain stimulation, we're not trying to make them the best they can be because we don't understand how they're working. So we're still trying to do that basic science. Well, we know that this is therapeutic, but we have no idea why or how. So that level of complexity makes me think that there's something more than just random happenstance that has come about with that. The other piece that I think of is that nobody's identified what a thought is. Are familiar with the University of Minnesota at all, but their cardiac unit or in their medical area, there's like a Lillahai wing. He was huge in heart transplants and doing pacemaker research and things like that. He worked a lot with Medtronic about developing pacemakers and defibrillators and things like that. But at this wedding, my brother-in-law was talking to him, and he said that one of the crazy things about doing heart transplants and those sorts of surgeries is that he can do everything right, he can get everything connected, and then there's a moment where you turn the machines off and then you just have to wait for it to get going. And most of the time that happens, but sometimes it doesn't, and like there's nothing that he has found that he can, like, it's really just standing back and then letting God take over. And that is kind of that gap, or that's how I think about that gap, is we can explain as much as we can figure out all of the science, but at the end of the day we just kind of have to step back, and that's where it is.
We talk about one of the functional groups that we talk about is known as terpenes. You guys remember the terpene? So the terpene is made up of a 5-carbon unit, right? And that's in terms of, a chemical molecule, that's very simple, right? I mean, there's really hardly anything to it at all. 5 carbons, 12 hydrogens, okay? And you put enough of these together, and what do you have? You have monoterpenes or sesquiterpenes or diterpenes or whatever terpene you have. And within nature, the terpene has a very, very important role, right? It provides the aroma for flowers, for trees, for plants, right? But it all comes from this very, seemingly very, very simple compound, right? Okay, so that to me also shows you have it on one end, you've got just the awesomeness of what we're dealing with And on the other end, you have a very, very simple piece, one example of many, I'm sure, of where, God has made these types of things where they're very seemingly very simple, but yet play a very vital role.
And so complexity, doesn't prove that there's God, but it definitely, you can be in awe of, some of the things that he does in the complexity. Just in the example of DNA. This is this crazy molecule that's made up of these subunits, and, in these small organisms like bacteria, there may be millions of these subunits put together that can code for these things that make the bacteria, this cell that lives by itself. But now in humans, the DNA, we've got, billions of these things that attach that give us all the complex, features that are in our bodies there. And so it's, amazing that this works, and continues to work. We continue to create more humans using this mechanism here. And so it's ridiculously complex. But if you wanted to, you can, look at how this could have happened through evolutionary mechanisms. But, whether it did or not is kind of dependent upon faith, because we're not going to prove that God did this. We can't scientifically prove that God exists. We have to have faith, and that's where faith comes into play. In believing that God, exists, that God is there for us. It's not an angry God out there. He loves us.
Getting closer to biology, look at an eyelash. See if I can pull one out. Have you ever considered the design of an eyelash? Why is it curled? Some people have these beautifully curled eyelashes or whatever, but why are they curled? Why not straight?
So that they don't go in your eyes when you blink.
That makes sense, but even if they were just straight out, you would blink and they might rub your lower eyelid a little bit, but they wouldn't necessarily go in your eyes.
To stop water from getting in your eyes when it's raining?
Maybe, but okay, so consider what would happen if your eyelash was just straight and you got one in your eye. One falls out and one gets in your eye.
Oh,
And then you start blinking.
just scratch it.
It would scratch the bejeebies out of it. It would hurt. But you would probably get it out, right? I guess maybe I'm speculating now, but since it's curved, it fits the contour of your eye and then can very gently glide over the surface of your eye till your eye sort of works it out. So the design of just that eyelash is awesome. And one of the implications of evolution, if humans were entirely shaped by adaptive processes, is that at some point, enough humans with straight eyelashes died because they got mauled by a bear or something, or couldn't, maybe they scarred their eyes and became blind. I don't know. And then over time, the ones with the curled eyelashes were okay, yeah, you're the ones that made it through the evolutionary funnel. I don't know. That seems ridiculous to me. I think there's brilliant design in even the small things like the eyelashes. And so, yeah, I guess I do see God in creation.
When in genetics we talk about, the probability of mutations occurring in an organism, and you can have mutations, but most mutations are bad. They end up harming the organism. But you can have beneficial mutations, but then there has to be a selection for that beneficial mutation to ultimately, kind of take hold, and now for that organism to kind of take advantage of that mutation. And there's a there's a big number game that, allows this to keep happening over and over and over and over again. And it takes time for each of those things to happen. And I don't believe that a million or a billion years is long enough for all of that to actually happen.
The entropy thing, have you guys ever heard that like evolution is impossible because one of the laws of nature is that everything is trending towards chaos, and evolution basically says the opposite, that like you get better and better over time. Like both are true, but what's the rub? Like how can you hold both of those in the same sentence, or like how can both be true at the same time? You can. The answer's in the sun. So like what powers all of the biosphere?
Sun.
The sun. And so the energy that goes into the biosphere, all living organisms, creates organisms that produce excess every generation, and some of those excess die. The ones that survive are the ones that are best adapted to their environment. And so you're getting better and better every generation, but the entropy, the disorder, is not happening on Earth. It's happening in the nuclear furnace of the sun that we're told will die out sometime in the next, I don't know, umpteen billion years. So entropy is at work. Things are trending towards chaos, just not here.
But I think the one thing that really pins it down is how do I define, say a human versus, some animal. And I think that would have to be that humans have the ability or the possibility for some type of redemption. Okay. That can happen, and how that happens is obviously the stuff of many good books and literature and movies and things like that. That's the story, right? You have the protagonist does something, it doesn't go well, or makes a mistake, but yet there is the possibility for that person then to experience some type of redemption. I mean, there are other things too. I mean, emotions. There's certain activities that you can experience, whether it's loss or elation. But I mean, in the animal kingdom, there are those types of emotions too. But I don't know that there's really anything that rivals the idea of redemption.
Thinking about it from neuroscience, if we're getting more at what makes humans unique and like what makes humankind different than a cat or a dog or a monkey or anything like that, cognitive neuroscience definitely has some things that they study that you can't study in other animals because it is truly unique to humans. And those would include things like language. So while other animals might be able to communicate, they don't do it with the same sort of complexity of language that humans have. Kind of an aspect along with language is that we can have abstract thoughts and abstract ideas, and we can manipulate those in a way that if you don't have language, you really can't. Like, we can put ideas in people's minds of things that they've never thought about before, and you can visualize it, you can realistically think about it, you could think about what you're doing in 5 years. We don't know that any other animal is able to do that. So those are kind of components of cognition that are very distinctly human. Whether that defines humankind or humanity, that's really up for another debate or another discussion. But those are kind of features that we think about in the realm of neuroscience that you can't study in other animals because it is truly human. Part of me is scared that if the definition of the mind is really what's going to be the definition of humankind, that can lead to a number of ethical questions about people who lose their mind, or what happens in certain disease states where people might lose some of those characteristics or those qualities. Does that then make them less human? So if you have a stroke and you can't speak or you can't communicate anymore, are you now no longer human? If you are deaf and your language is different, does that make you somehow less of a human? If you have problems relating to other people or manipulating abstract ideas or things that we think about truly being in the mind, like if you don't have that, are you now suddenly not human?
I believe that a human being is made in God's image and has a soul and also a body. All of the other animals, and including humans as animals taxonomically, like we fit right in the chordates and the vertebrates and the primates and whatnot. But all of the other animals and really all other life forms, I don't think, as far as I understand Scripture, has a soul. So I would say a human being has a soul. We are created in God's image. And then also you can biologically define us as, like, I don't know, members of Homo sapiens. We can, like, excuse if this sounds crass, but interbreed with other humans. Like there's sexual compatibility across all of humanity in a way that like you can't do across other species. So I guess maybe that's defining us taxonomically. But then I believe that God breathed into Adam and Eve the breath of life. And theologically, I'm not 100% positive where, like, the breath of life and a soul and being made in the image of God, like, whether they're equivalent or if there's like a three-way Venn diagram where you have some overlap in definition but some unique things. But I think that's what I call a human. And I mean, you can even go a little farther to, like, talk about, like, whole or part, or like is an egg or a sperm living? Like, maybe by some definitions, but not by most. Is a liver living if it's perfused with blood and undergoing cellular respiration? But no, it has to be, I think a human has to be like the whole individual, or at least contain a mind that has rational thought.
The current paradigm that we're in science is really reductionist. So we want to get things as simple as we possibly can. So just studying the brain is really all that we're doing. That being said, there are definitely things that we cannot study, because getting down to that simple level, you can't do it. There's still something that we haven't figured out. There's some gap that's there. If you want to say that that's the mind, that that's religion, that that's God, I think that is a step that you can take. The tough thing with that is if our technology advances and we get to the point where we can narrow that gap a little bit, have you now taken God completely out of it?
We have to kind of factor things in that, well, it's extremely unlikely that something like this would happen by chance. It's not impossible. And so complexity doesn't necessarily mean, divine. It's just that it's a very, intricate or, complicated process.
I mean, I cannot go into the lab and say, all right, today I'm going to prove that there's a God. Okay, that's impossible. And if you do that, I think you're treading on a very, very dangerous pathway.
I think we have to, it's easy to say that, because something is complex, it points to a creator. But I think that's also dangerous. And I've had friends that were Christians and then, started studying science and fell away from the faith. Part of it is because they've been taught at early, at some point in school, I shouldn't say early in school, that, that because things are complex, that points to a creator, but then they learn in the science classes that there are these mechanisms for making these complex things that don't involve a creator, and now they think, start to think that, what they were learning earlier was, garbage. And so it doesn't make sense. Why do I need God if this happens? It just happens naturally. It is kind of disproving the need for God. And so I think we have to be careful again in how we're using science. Again, trying to suggest that a scientific finding proves God, you're going to be disappointed somewhere down the line. And so we have to keep things in perspective, that science is a tool that God has given us. God's given us rational thought and logical thinking to be able to benefit humans and benefit the world and things like that. But again, we're not replacing God. We're not proving God with it. We're just better understanding the things that God made.
Ultimately, I see the most powerful apologetic not being in starting with nature. Sometimes it's helpful, like if somebody's primed for that, but I think you have to show somebody the brokenness around them and within themselves, but graciously, and then B, show them the Savior that makes all things new. And yeah, but like that's going to be more powerful than any really cogent argument about how humans couldn't have evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees. Like it's going to come down to the gospel and grace.
I mean, if you want to ask the fundamental question, all right, so what's our purpose? Okay, obviously our purpose is to use the gifts and talents and time that we've been given to glorify God, okay? And how many ways does that happen? Well, only slightly less than 1 million, right? In whatever, depending on what I'm doing. So as a chemist, I have the opportunity to show, as a chemistry professor, I have the opportunity to show how wonderful and cool the natural universe is. Okay, so in addition to saying, well, yeah, I mean, you guys have to know the periodic table, and this is what this means, and we have to be able to do these types of calculations, but also there should be some type of wonder. Okay, I mean, we should have in every classroom, we should have Psalm 19:1. Actually, getting back to the terpene example. Okay, so you guys, I didn't realize this until many years ago when I was kind of looking at terpenes, and I realized that sesquiterpenes, which is made up of the 3 isoprene units. Okay, so that's 3, right? And if you look around, that's one of the most common motifs structurally in the plant world. Okay, and to me it was like, oh, that's a Trinitarian type of motif. There's 3: Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Right? So I mean, but would I can make that assessment because I'm studying as a Christian, and it's like, oh, God clued me into that one day, and I was like, wow, yeah, there's this little Trinitarian signature throughout nature. Every time we smell a rose or an Easter lily, that actually came to me when I was in Easter. All the Easter lilies in church. You smell the farnesol, and I go, wait a minute, that's, wow, yeah, that's cool. So, but but it wouldn't ever say, oh, because of that, I'm a Christian now. Everything in your faith has to inform it, not it doesn't inform your faith.
But I think the natural curiosity aspect of it is something that, I mean, God instilled that in us. We want to find out about the world around us. We want to find out about his creation and thinking about the complexity of everything, and he created it with a word that's mind-boggling. And if we take it from that perspective that it is trying to uncover the mysteries of the world and then gain that appreciation, I think that's using science for good.
Well, so I think I haven't given the things that I see that in my mind are like it's hard to explain them without a God. I think those do exist, and scientists, secular scientists that don't believe in God will do their best to explain them away. But the biggest one for me is, where did the first seed of life come from if it wasn't a creator God? Like you have to have a cell. As far as we understand life, you have to have a cell or a contained system that can replicate itself. And like if you look up something called the RNA world hypothesis, like some scientists have suggested that first life form might have been RNA, because RNA, unlike DNA and unlike proteins, RNA can have both enzymatic and like coding potential. So maybe there was RNA involved in this first like proto life form. But even then, like if you look at the structure of a nucleotide, like it's complex. And then to think you have multiple nucleotides that create these RNA molecules that would then be able to self-assemble and replicate in a way that was like, it's just BS. It's like there's no way to hand wave your way into doing it. And I think one thing that sometimes scientists will argue is just like, well, the universe is infinitely big, and so life was going to arise somewhere, and we just happen to be the ones that are experiencing it. And well, okay, sure, I guess, like, I agree the universe is probably infinitely big, but for a different reason.
The thing you have to realize is that as you go out into the world, and if you're working in a lab or with a bunch of chemists or engineers or whatever, the one thing that I've always found kind of amazing is that there really are a lot more Christians out there than you might think. Okay, especially, I don't know what it is like internationally, but I mean, in the United States, you would probably be very surprised at how many people have, some type of at least familiarity with Christianity. Okay, that to me shows a couple of things. One is that regardless of how you're brought up or how you have gone through life, people realize that there is that aspect to them. Okay, to humans. Okay, and if you want to say, yeah, that's part of being, that's part of my humanity. Okay, people realize that regardless of what they really truly believe. So they know that that's there, and that's an aspect that's part of them. Okay.